There is a specific kind of emotional intelligence that isn't learned in schools or books, but is forged in the invisible fires of a difficult past. If you're here to decode the hidden patterns of your own mind and transform them into strength, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the wake and win family, because true awareness is the first step to real freedom. Most people walk through life assuming that a deep, almost psychic ability to feel others is a gift, and it can be. But we need to talk about the version of this gift that comes with a hidden cost, a shadow origin story that very few dare to examine. We're talking about the empathy that isn't born from warmth and security, but is carved into the psyche by instability. This is not the empathy of the naturally open heart. This is the empathy of the survivor. The person who, long before they could articulate it, learned that their safety depended on their ability to predict the emotional weather of the room. They became experts in reading micro-expressions, in feeling the shift in a parent's mood before a single word was spoken. They didn't develop perception as a hobby, they developed it as a life support system. When you meet someone like this, you might call them deeply intuitive, a natural healer, impossibly compassionate. And they are. But beneath that beautiful, refined sensitivity, there's a foundation made of something much more turbulent. Trauma, more often than we'd like to admit, is the dark soil where this hyper-awareness first takes root. If you have ever felt completely exhausted after a simple social gathering, if you can sense a lie or a hidden tension in the air before anyone else, if you feel like you're constantly tuning into a radio station of emotions that no one else can hear, then you have to pause and ask yourself a difficult question. Did this ability blossom because the world welcomed you with open arms, or because the world once felt so unpredictable that you had to learn to anticipate the next emotional earthquake before it even began to tremble? The human psyche is brilliantly adaptive. When a child grows up in an environment where love is a reward, not a guarantee, where emotional stability is a fleeting guest, the unconscious mind sharpens its tools with surgical precision. It cultivates what we can call hypervigilance, disguised as emotional depth. The child learns to scan for tonal shifts, to notice the clench of a jaw, the way a smile doesn't quite reach the eyes. They become fluent in the language of the unspoken. But this isn't pure, detached compassion. It's a survival strategy wearing the mask of empathy. And this distinction matters because trauma-born empathy carries a burden that never clocks out. It's not just the ability to feel with others, it's the inability to stop feeling them. It doesn't ask for your permission to enter. It floods your system with emotional data, a constant stream of psychic information that your conscious mind was never designed to process without a filter. This constant influx creates a state of chronic, low-grade overwhelm. Have you ever left a party or a meeting and felt completely drained, even though nothing particularly dramatic happened? It's rarely the conversation itself that saps your energy. It's the invisible labor, the full-time job of constantly scanning the emotional horizon. You aren't just hearing words, you're absorbing atmospheres. You aren't just observing people, you're downloading their suppressed anxieties, their hidden disappointments, the conflicts they're too polite to mention. Now, here's the profound paradox that many miss about the empath who becomes a loner. They don't retreat from the world because they dislike people. They retreat because they feel people too intensely. Their solitude isn't a sign of cold indifference, it's a form of psychic self-preservation. There is a threshold, a point of no return where the psyche finally declares enough. It realizes that constant, unprotected emotional exposure is simply unsustainable. The individual might begin to withdraw not out of conscious choice at first, but as a deep, instinctive reflex. Social spaces start to feel like assault. Crowds feel suffocating. Even relationships that were once comfortable can begin to feel heavy, demanding an emotional engagement that feels like a debt they can no longer pay. This withdrawal is almost always misinterpreted by the outside world. Friends might label you aloof, standoffish, or even arrogant. But in reality, this is the psyche trying to find its balance. It's the unconscious mind drawing a line in the sand, saying, "You cannot keep absorbing without boundaries or you will lose yourself entirely." You need to understand something crucial here. These trauma-born empaths stand at a very delicate psychological crossroads. They possess an extraordinary, almost superhuman perceptive ability. But they also carry the very real risk of psychological fragmentation. If they can't learn to regulate this gift, to build a dam against the flood, their empathy can become a slow, corrosive force that eats away at their own sense of self. This is the stage where so many get stuck. They either try to numb themselves completely, shutting down their perception and feeling nothing, or they remain in a state of perpetual overwhelm, trapped in a cycle of emotional burnout. Only a rare few manage to navigate this and transform their trauma-born empathy into a stable, integrated source of power. So what makes the difference? It's not the presence of empathy itself, but the development of internal architecture. The individual must learn a lesson that seems counterintuitive. Perception does not require absorption. To see someone's pain does not mean you have to carry it. To understand their fear does not mean you have to merge with it. But how do you learn to separate seeing from carrying, when for your entire life they have been the exact same thing? This lesson is monumentally difficult for trauma-born empaths because their original survival strategy was built on merging. As children, they couldn't afford to put up fences. Their safety depended on being completely enmeshed with the emotional field around them. Anticipating the state of a volatile parent was how they stayed safe. This mechanism gets wired deep into the nervous system. So, as adults, they face an agonizing inner conflict. One part of them is still compulsively trying to connect and attune, while another part is screaming for distance. This creates a torturous push-pull, a psychic war between the longing for connection and the desperate need for withdrawal. You might feel this as a strange contradiction in your own life. You crave a deep, soulful connection, but when it arrives, you feel suffocated. You want intimacy, but prolonged closeness makes you want to run. You desperately want to help people, but their demands leave you feeling empty and resentful. This is not a character flaw. This is your psyche trying to renegotiate the terms of your survival after a lifetime of being too open, too attuned, too available. On a deeper, more symbolic level, the trauma-born empath loner often embodies an ancient archetype, the wounded seer. Throughout mythology, there are figures who gain profound insight precisely because they have suffered. They see more clearly than others, but their vision isolates them. They understand the human heart with painful clarity, yet they stand at the edge of the village, never quite belonging. This archetype exists in nearly every culture because it reflects a universal truth. Heightened awareness often comes at the price of simple belonging. To see too clearly is to notice the contradictions everyone else ignores. It's to perceive the hidden motives behind the polite smiles. It's to feel the dissonance beneath the fine thank yous. And this clarity creates a profound loneliness. For the trauma-born empath, this loneliness is more than social. It's existential. They often feel they can't share their inner reality because their perceptions are too complex, too nuanced, too deeply rooted in psychological dynamics that most people simply aren't aware of. This leads to a silent isolation, not a lack of people, but a lack of resonance. You can be in a crowded room and feel completely, fundamentally unseen. Now the danger here is psychological withdrawal turning into permanent exile. While solitude is necessary for healing and restoration, prolonged isolation can sever the relational parts of the self. We are wired for connection, even if it's difficult. The central challenge, then, isn't to kill the sensitivity, but to transform it. The empath must learn to differentiate between empathy and responsibility. They must understand that recognizing another's emotional state does not obligate them to fix it, manage it, or even soothe it. This realization is the beginning of true psychological individuation. Individuation, in this context, isn't about becoming less sensitive. It's about becoming more differentiated. It's the ability to remain aware of the emotional ocean around you without drowning in it. For the trauma-born empath, this requires a seismic shift in identity. They must move from the unconscious role of the emotional janitor, the one who constantly cleans up the psychic messes of others, to a more autonomous, self-contained position. This shift is terrifying because it challenges the very foundation of their survival pattern. Letting go of hyper-attunement feels like dismantling the radar that kept you safe from incoming missiles. The unconscious mind fears that without constant vigilance, the danger will return. But what the psyche must learn is that adulthood offers new forms of protection that childhood did not. You have agency. You have choice. You have the power to walk away. These are the tools that allow the empath to remain perceptive without being consumed. Only when this transformation takes hold can trauma-born empathy evolve into something truly formidable. It is no longer a reactive survival mechanism, but a conscious tool for insight. It allows the individual to understand the depths of another person without losing themselves in the process. This is the real reason why so few survive this stage healthily. It requires not just awareness, but immense courage. The courage to release the old patterns that once protected you but now hold you back. If you are on this path, you must understand that your solitude is not a sign of failure. It is a stage of deep, necessary restructuring. You are not withdrawing because you are broken. You are withdrawing because your inner world is undergoing a metamorphosis. And this transformation, as painful as it is, contains the seed of something extraordinary, the birth of a self that can feel deeply without being destroyed, that can perceive clearly without becoming a hermit, that can engage with humanity without losing its center. When this stage is navigated successfully, the trauma-born empath loner does not become detached from the world. They become anchored within themselves. They no longer merge with the emotional chaos. They stand within it, clear and steady. And from this position, they possess a rare gift, the ability to see human nature with both deep compassion and clear discernment, without illusion, without self-sacrifice, and without losing their psychological integrity. This is the threshold where survival finally transforms into sovereignty, and it is a threshold that very, very few people ever reach. As you approach this threshold, the point where your empathy must either transform or consume you, you will encounter a very strange psychological experience. It feels almost paradoxical, doesn't it? The very thing that once connected you to the world now begins to separate you from it. You start seeing the patterns beneath the surface, and you can no longer unsee them. And with this new vision comes a quiet but profound shift in your relationship to everyone. At first, it doesn't feel like strength. It feels like disillusionment. You watch interactions that once seemed normal, and suddenly you sense the unconscious negotiations, the hidden fears driving the egos, the unspoken power dynamics. What was once simple is now layered and complex, and this new awareness is deeply unsettling. This stage creeps up on you. It's not a lightning bolt, but a slow dawn. A series of small moments where you realize you can no longer participate in emotional exchanges the way you used to. Conversations that were once engaging now feel like a chore. Not because you've lost interest in people, but because you can feel the subtext. You sense the gap between what is being said and what is being felt. You detect the performance. This heightened perception creates a real psychological dilemma. You cannot unknow what you now know, and this is where the archetype of the seer becomes so relevant. The seer is always both blessed and cursed. They have vision, but that vision isolates them. They understand truths that others deny, and that places them on the outside. The trauma-born empath enters this exact territory. You begin to see that most human interaction is built on silent agreements. Agreements to maintain the illusion, to avoid the hard truths, to keep the peace at the cost of authenticity. But once you see the strings, it becomes nearly impossible to pretend the puppet is dancing on its own. This creates what can only be called the loneliness of clarity. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of knowing you are seeing a different movie than everyone else in the theater. This stage is dangerous because it can lead to an unconscious decision to just stop engaging. The psyche, overwhelmed by the constant input of hidden data, might try to protect itself by shutting down the receiver. You might find yourself avoiding certain places or people, not because you've made a conscious choice, but because your nervous system screams no before your mind can even catch up. Crowded spaces, emotionally charged gatherings, or relationships full of unspoken conflict start to feel physically intolerable, don't they? At a physical level, this isn't just in your head. The body remembers. The trauma-born empath often carries a nervous system that was conditioned by unpredictability. It's a system set to a higher baseline of alert. It's always scanning. When this system is exposed to too much emotional stimulus, it hits overload and can shut down to protect itself. You might experience this as sudden bone-deep exhaustion, mental fog, a feeling of numbness, or an urgent, panicked need to escape. It's vital to see this not as weakness, but as an adaptation. Your body is trying to regulate an input that exceeds its capacity. But if this withdrawal becomes a permanent state without conscious integration, it leads to a more serious risk, dissociation from life itself. This is where trauma-born empathy can curdle into emotional detachment. The person, exhausted from years of feeling everything, may unconsciously decide to feel nothing. They may lose not only the ability to absorb others' pain, but also their own capacity for joy and depth. This stage can be deceptive. It can look like calmness to the outside world. People might say you've matured, that you're so stable now, so composed. But inside, it feels very different. It feels like a quiet emptiness, a dimming of the lights, a world that has lost its color. This is not true individuation. This is protective shutdown. True individuation does not require you to kill your empathy. It requires you to separate your empathy from your identity. The trauma-born empath must learn that they are not their perception. They are not their ability to sense a room. These are functions of the psyche, not the core of the self. At this juncture, a crucial transformation must occur, the shift from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy. Unconscious empathy is automatic. It has no filter. It merges and absorbs. It's a reflex. Conscious empathy, however, involves choice. It lets you perceive without entering the emotional state. It lets you understand without identifying. It creates a sacred space between observation and absorption. This shift is brutally hard for the trauma-born empath because it means dismantling the very strategy that kept them alive. The unconscious mind resists this change because it has confused hypervigilance with safety. But what the psyche must finally learn is that the conditions that created the need for that vigilance are in the past. As an adult, you have power. You can choose your environment. You can build fences. You can leave. You are no longer a helpless child dependent on a volatile caregiver for survival. The unconscious, however, is slow to update its software. It runs on old code. This is why trauma-born empaths often feel trapped between the past and the present, isn't it? Their current life might be safe, but their internal responses are still calibrated for the danger of long ago. To move past this, you must engage in a deliberate process of reorientation. You have to teach your psyche that perception does not require constant combat readiness. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through the development of inner boundaries. Not walls, but boundaries. These are psychological filters that allow you to maintain awareness of others without letting their emotional state penetrate your core. You can observe someone's grief without making it your own. You can understand their fear without internalizing it. You can witness their chaos without being destabilized. This realization doesn't make you less compassionate. It refines your compassion. Empathy rooted in unconscious merging leads to burnout. Empathy grounded in differentiation leads to sustainability. This distinction is a major turning point. It's the moment when survival starts to give way to genuine autonomy. Yet this transition is almost always accompanied by another layer of pain. The realization that many of your relationships were built on your role as the unpaid emotional regulator. When you stop absorbing, when you stop automatically stabilizing everyone around you, when you start using your new boundaries, some relationships will change. And not always for the better. People who relied on your emotional labor may react with confusion or even hostility. They might accuse you of being selfish, cold, or distant. They will try to pull you back into the old dynamic where you served as their anchor. This reaction is not a reflection of your failure. It's a reflection of the unconscious balance that existed in that relationship. When one person changes, the whole system has to readjust. For the trauma-born empath, this stage can be incredibly isolating. You may find yourself standing at a distance from people you once felt so close to. You may grieve, not just for the lost relationships, but for the loss of your old identity. You are no longer the one who absorbs everything. You are no longer the one who exists primarily as a response to others. You are becoming something unfamiliar, an individual whose center lies within themselves. And this transformation, though absolutely necessary, often feels like wandering through a vast, empty wilderness. It is here in this psychological terrain that the next phase begins. The phase where trauma-born empathy is not just managed, but truly integrated into a stable and enduring sense of self. And it is within this integration that the loner stops being defined by isolation and starts to embody something far more profound. An inner sovereignty that allows for connection without surrender, perception without depletion, and compassion without self-erasure. This is the path that only a tiny fraction of people ever complete. And it is the psychological reason why so few truly survive this transformation in its highest form. As you move deeper, you enter a territory that is both unsettling and sacred. A space where the old you is gone, but the new you hasn't fully arrived. The alchemists called this the negrito, the black phase, the dark night of the soul where old structures must crumble so something authentic can be built. For the trauma-born empath loner, this feels like a quiet collapse of familiar landmarks. The roles that once defined your worth, the fixer, the listener, the peacekeeper, lose their power. You no longer feel compelled to anticipate, soothe, or carry others like you once did. The unconscious contracts that bound you to these roles begin to dissolve, and with that dissolution comes an unfamiliar emptiness. This emptiness can be frightening. It's not the intense overwhelm of hyper-attunement, nor the numbing fog of protective shutdown. It's something quieter, a pause in the usual movement of the psyche. Many mistake this for a loss. They ask themselves, often with a quiet panic, who am I if I'm no longer the one who holds everything together? Who am I if I'm not defined by my ability to feel everything for everyone? You need to understand that this question marks a profound turning point. It signals that the psyche is shifting from a relational identity, one defined by interaction with others, to an intrinsic identity rooted in the self. This distinction is everything. The relational identity depends on external dynamics for its purpose. It feels valuable because it is needed. The intrinsic identity, however, emerges from a deeper center. It doesn't need to be needed. For the trauma-born empath, this move feels like stepping off a cliff. It means letting go of a powerful, subtle attachment, the attachment to being necessary. You see, for many, their early life taught them that their value was tied to their ability to stabilize the environment. They learned unconsciously that their sensitivity was the reason they were tolerated, accepted, or even loved. Their worth became intertwined with their function. As this function dissolves, the unconscious can feel like it's facing extinction. It might produce anxiety, a sense of restlessness, a feeling of purposelessness, as if something essential is slipping through your fingers. But what is actually happening is not loss. It is reorganization. The psyche is redistributing its energy. The emotional resources that were once constantly aimed outward are now being redirected inward. This withdrawal isn't disengagement from life, it's the redirection of attention toward the inner world. At this stage, many trauma-born empaths start to have a more intense relationship with their own unconscious. Dreams get weirder, more vivid. Symbols appear. Inner reflections deepen. It's as if the psyche, no longer distracted by the job of external monitoring, finally has the space to reveal its own hidden contents. This encounter with the inner world can be both illuminating and disorienting. For the first time, you might start to notice aspects of yourself that were always overshadowed by your focus on others. You might discover suppressed anger, long-buried grief, desires you never admitted to, impulses that contradict the gentle, compassionate persona you've worn for so long. This is the encounter with the shadow. For trauma-born empaths, the shadow often contains everything they were never allowed to express: assertiveness, healthy selfishness, resentment, even rage. Because their early survival depended on keeping the peace, these parts were pushed down into the dark. They became incompatible with the identity of the good, empathic child. But as individuation progresses, the shadow inevitably surfaces. It demands to be seen. Not because it wants to destroy your empathy, but because it seeks balance. True empathy cannot exist alongside the complete suppression of your own needs. This confrontation with the shadow can feel deeply unsettling. You may find yourself feeling emotions that seem foreign or unacceptable. You might feel anger toward the very people you've spent your life supporting. You might see patterns of self-sacrifice that now look less like love and more like self-harm. It is essential that you do not interpret these revelations as signs of moral failure. They are not signs that you are becoming a bad person, are they? They are indicators of psychological integration. Your psyche is trying to find balance. It is bringing into the light the parts of you that were exiled to maintain your old role. These aspects don't negate your empathy. They protect it from becoming self-destructive. In fact, without the integration of the shadow, your empathy remains incomplete. It stays vulnerable to exploitation, to exhaustion, to dissolution. When the trauma-born empath begins to integrate their shadow, a profound shift occurs. Empathy becomes grounded in strength, not vulnerability. It becomes discerning, not indiscriminate. It gains the ability to tell the difference between a genuine need and a manipulative demand. This shift will show up in your relationships. You may find you no longer react automatically to everyone's emotional signals. You might pause before offering to help. You might feel a new, strange, but wonderful ability to say no without a tidal wave of guilt. This change can startle the people in your life. They may see you as less accessible, less accommodating. Some will interpret this negatively because it breaks the old rules of the relationship. But internally, something new is taking root. A sense of stability that doesn't depend on constant emotional engagement with others. This stability comes from what we can call the emergence of the inner center, a psychological point of reference that remains intact no matter what is happening outside. It is the experience of being anchored within yourself. For the trauma-born empath loner, this anchoring is everything. You are no longer pointed outward at the mercy of every emotional wind. You are oriented toward your own internal axis. From here, your perception changes. You may still sense the currents, but they no longer sweep you away. They are registered as information, not absorbed as lived experience. This is the extraordinary capacity of witnessing without merging. You can observe conflict without becoming destabilized. You can encounter suffering without losing your footing. You can offer compassion without sacrificing your own integrity. This is the stage where trauma-born empathy becomes conscious insight. And yet this transformation brings with it another form of solitude, one that is less painful but just as real. As your inner center strengthens, you may notice that your resonance with many people simply fades, doesn't it? Not because you don't care, but because your frequency has changed. You are no longer drawn to emotional chaos. You are no longer compelled to participate in unconscious games. This often results in a smaller social world. You may find that only certain people feel truly compatible now, those with a similar level of self-awareness, those who respect boundaries, those capable of authentic connection rather than emotional entanglement. This selective resonance is not isolation. It is individuation. The trauma-born empath loner, having walked through hyperattunement, disillusionment, withdrawal, shadow work, and inner anchoring, begins to embody a presence that is both deeply perceptive and quietly sovereign. They are no longer defined by their loneliness, nor by their sensitivity alone. They have become something more complex, an individual whose empathy is rooted in consciousness, not compulsion. This state is rare, not because it's unattainable, but because it requires a long, painful journey through dissolution, confrontation, and reconstruction. It demands that you give up the identity of the perpetual caregiver. It demands that you face your shadow without running. It demands that you tolerate the solitude of inner change without seeking escape through external validation. Few are willing to go all the way, but those who do emerge not diminished, but profoundly transformed. They possess a depth of perception that is no longer a burden, a capacity for connection that no longer threatens their stability, and an inner center that remains unshaken, even in the turbulence of human experience. And it is from this center that the final stage unfolds. The stage where empathy is no longer just a survival tool or a personal trait, but becomes an instrument of psychological clarity, a lens that can illuminate both yourself and the world without consuming either. This is the threshold that very few reach, and it is here that the trauma-born empath loner ceases to be defined by survival and begins to embody the full sovereignty of the individuated self. When this final threshold opens, you may notice something subtle but unmistakable has changed in how you inhabit the world. It's not dramatic, it's not a spectacle, it's an inner realignment so profound that it quietly changes everything. You no longer experience empathy as something that happens to you. It's no longer a flood you can't control. Instead, it becomes something you possess, something you can direct, something that operates under the quiet authority of your conscious will. This distinction marks the completion of the journey. This is the emergence of psychological sovereignty. You have moved from unconscious attunement to conscious perception, from survival-driven vigilance to self-directed awareness, from emotional merging to differentiated presence. And this sovereignty has a quality that's hard to describe. It's not cold detachment. It's not indifference. It's a state where you can be fully present to the emotional reality of others without losing yourself. This presence is extraordinarily rare because it requires the integration of two opposing forces, deep sensitivity and strong boundaries. Most people have one at the expense of the other. They are either highly empathic and easily overwhelmed or strongly defended and emotionally disconnected. But the trauma-born empath who has completed the path embodies both. You can feel without dissolving. You can understand without absorbing. You can care without sacrificing yourself. This balance creates a new kind of relational dynamic. Others will sense something unusual in your presence. A calm that isn't passive, an attentiveness that doesn't intrude, a steadiness that doesn't try to control. People may find themselves telling you things they've never told anyone. They may feel seen in a way that is neither invasive nor demanding. They feel safe with you simply because your awareness doesn't impose itself, doesn't it? And yet, there is also something unmistakably firm about your presence. You no longer send out the unconscious signals of endless availability. There's a clarity in your boundaries that communicates without words that you cannot be drawn into someone else's turmoil. This combination, deep receptivity paired with unwavering self-containment, is the hallmark of the fully integrated empathic individual. At this stage, the loneliness transforms. It doesn't vanish completely because individuation always carries an element of solitude, but it changes. It's no longer the loneliness of exclusion, but the solitude of inner completeness. You are not alone because you can't be understood. You are alone because you have found a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on constant external resonance. This inner companionship provides a stability you never had. It allows you to engage with others from a place of wholeness, not need. Connection becomes a choice, not a necessity for survival. From here, your relationship with humanity shifts. You begin to see human behavior with a clarity that holds both compassion and discernment. You can recognize the wounds that drive people without excusing the harm they cause. You can understand unconscious patterns without getting tangled in them. This balanced perspective shows up as a quiet wisdom, a capacity to respond to life's complexity with nuance, not reactivity. You are less easily provoked. Situations that once overwhelmed you now appear as patterns, not threats. You can observe conflict with a kind of symbolic awareness, seeing the archetypal dramas playing out beneath the surface. You see the frightened child in the aggressive adult, the longing for love in the defensive pride, the fear of abandonment in the controlling behavior. These perceptions no longer destabilize you. They deepen your understanding, and that understanding lets you choose your response rather than just reacting. Perhaps the most profound shift is in your relationship to your own past. The trauma that shaped your empathy no longer defines you. It becomes integrated into your story as a source of insight, not limitation. You can look back, not with bitterness, but with a sober recognition of how your psyche adapted. You see how it developed these incredible perceptive abilities to survive. You recognize that the same sensitivity that once overwhelmed you also gave you a map to navigate the most complex terrains of the human heart. And this realization brings a subtle but powerful reconciliation. You no longer see your past only as something that wounded you. You see it as something that shaped you, something that, through a long and painful process, contributed to your depth. This doesn't mean you romanticize suffering. It means you integrate it. Integration allows you to stand in the present without being unconsciously driven by the past. The survival patterns that once ran on autopilot are now conscious knowledge. You can access them when needed, but they no longer control you. This liberation is the true completion of individuation. And from this point, empathy evolves into something that extends beyond your personal story. It becomes a lens for seeing the collective dynamics of human existence. You may find yourself recognizing patterns not just in individuals, but in groups, in culture, and history. The ways fear, projection, and unconscious conflict shape everything. This expanded awareness is the final transformation. You no longer see your sensitivity as a personal burden. You recognize it as a capacity for understanding the deeper currents of life itself. And yet, even at this peak, a profound humility remains. You realize that perception, no matter how refined, is not omniscience, don't you? The unconscious is vast. The complexity of human experience is infinite. So the fully integrated empath doesn't stand above humanity, but within it. Aware of its contradictions, its wounds, its resilience, its potential for both destruction and creation. And from this position, something quietly remarkable happens. Empathy ceases to be reactive or defensive. It becomes creative. It allows you to contribute to the world not by absorbing its suffering, but by illuminating its hidden patterns. Your presence becomes a stabilizing force. Not because you carry others' burdens, but because you embody a psychological coherence that others can unconsciously sense. You become a living example of what it means to remain sensitive without being overwhelmed, aware without being consumed, connected without losing yourself. And this, ultimately, is why so few fully survive the journey of the trauma-born empath loner. It's not because the path is hidden. It's because it requires enduring a long, often lonely transformation. One that asks you to relinquish old identities, to confront the parts of yourself you've kept in the dark, to tolerate profound uncertainty, to patiently rebuild your inner foundation from the ground up. Most turn back. But those who persist discover something no external achievement can provide, a stable center of awareness that remains intact regardless of the storm. From this center, empathy is no longer a vulnerability. It is a quiet, unshakable power. Your sensitivity is not a wound. It is a compass that learned true north in the dark. And it is here, finally, that the trauma-born empath loner ceases to exist as just a survivor, and begins to live as an individuated self, one whose sensitivity no longer binds them to the past, but opens them fully to the depth, the complexity, and the profound beauty of being human. The loner's heart isn't empty, it's just full of a depth that most crowds cannot hold. If this journey resonated with something deep inside you, please hit that like button to help others on this path find their way to winds of thought. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started.